So today's a beautiful day in Pennsylvania. We've had days of rain and following weather that has been in the 90s and humidity that has been completely stifling. We now have a fresh breeze going this morning. It feels like October all of a sudden. I actually have jeans on today. You didn't even feel like you could wear clothes earlier this week. So I'm going for a walk today. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to actually walk down to the fernhouse site. I have been kind of wondering about the bittersweet that I used to make a wreath this week. And I've been curious to know if the bittersweet that's growing here on the property is actually American bittersweet or if it is the ornamental bittersweet, which is actually an invasive species. So we're going to go down there. We're going to check it out. We're going to get educated about this property, find out what's growing and living here with us. I'm excited to see what we'll find. Well, we didn't get too far and I found a patch of blackberries. I love picking wild berries around our property. Different years, different areas are like little hot spots, but this patch has done well year after year. I think with all the wet weather we had this year, the berries are just exceptionally full and hopefully exceptionally delicious. Delicious. Well, here's an interesting mushroom. Again, not the bittersweet I was after, but something of interest to point out. If you want to know more about this mushroom, you can Google dog stinkhorn, or, well, yeah, there's some other things you can Google too, and you'll get information on this. Not only does this mushroom look like the genitalia of a dog, but the brown stuff that it excretes on the top stinks like the contents of a litter box. So, yeah, you know, there's probably plenty of reasons why it grows alone. Mushrooms are really cool to find when you're hiking because they look really solitary, but they really reflect a mass web of connection happening under the forest floor. We'll talk more about that later. Now, I've been trying to learn to identify the different ferns around our property better, and I know now that these are sensitive ferns. I'll show you more about how I'm identifying them later. Oh, and check these out. These are puffballs, and those little puffs coming out of them are spores. The spores are actually how the mushroom reproduces. It's like scattering seeds. So you're going to see a puffball show back up later in this hike. There it is. That vine is what we came down here to look at. That is the bittersweet vine on the left. The thicker vine there on the right is actually grapevine. But yeah, the one that's wrapped around the tree, that's what we're looking at. And I'm trying to look up as high as I can. Of course, the leaves and the berries are up high in the tree, not down close where I can really get my hands on them and look. So I'm really studying from afar, but I'm looking at a few characteristics here to be able to determine the difference between Oriental bittersweet and American. One is the size of the leaf, and two is the distribution of the berries along the stem. Now, the Oriental bittersweet was introduced to the U.S. in like the 1800s. And wow, look at it. See that? I'm telling you, there's just a mass amount of it down here. And it just grows very rapidly here in the States. Obviously, anything that is foreign to an ecosystem usually lacks the checks and balances needed to help it grow at a controlled rate. So this just grows like crazy, and it often overtops trees and tall plants, causing damage. And you can see, look back there to the right, you can really see how that vine is so twisted like a rope, so it can actually choke off literally strangulating trees as it grows. It is very beautiful though. So if this is Oriental bittersweet, it would really be to the favor of this environment and to what I'm doing down here to get it under control. And one of the ways I can do that is actually harvest it and use it as part of the building project. There's a lot of really creative projects, very aesthetic creative projects that you can do with bittersweet vine. So that's something I'm going to look into. Here's a little bit more of an up close. So American bittersweet would just have the berries located at the end of the stems, and they would have a narrower leaf, whereas the Oriental bittersweet has a broader leaf, a larger leaf, and it has berries located at all the axils of the leaves going back across the stem, which is very much what I'm seeing here. So it does appear that what I have growing, look at that, the whole top of that tree is just covered by this vine. What I do have growing down here is the Oriental bittersweet. I'm not out to wage a war on it or anything like that, but I most definitely will consider using it for projects at the fern house. I cannot help but to notice these little mushrooms popping up everywhere. They are truly the fruits of the forest. And they are the fruit that is produced by the massive underground network of fungus that's growing. And those fungus actually have a very symbiotic relationship with the tree roots. So massive tall trees are relying heavily upon the information that the fungus underground is providing them about their environment, about diseases, and then the tree gives back to the fungus by providing it glucose through photosynthesis. It's a very cool relationship. This area of ferns I think is so pretty. It's just growing naturally, but almost like a garden. And I'm learning that these are actually called Christmas ferns, which I think is really beautiful. I'm looking forward to taking you along down with me at some point to my local native plant nursery, where they have lots of ferns there that we can use for comparison, and actually get down to the nitty-gritty of actually naming all the ferns that are living and thriving here around the fern house building site. So the last 2 nights, actually last 3 nights, we've had some pretty severe storms here. And we actually had a lightning strike that came down right here on the property, not far from the house. I was awake, brought my husband out of a dead sleep. It's the closest I've been to lightning for a while. When you get the sound and the light and everything simultaneously, you know it's for real. It shakes your head. So anyhow, I was kind of curious to get down here and see if there had been damage in this area of the property. I always kind of like to see if we can figure out where a lightning strike happened, if there's a tree down or whatever. My husband thinks it happened back behind our place. I thought it was maybe out here in front. It's hard to say when it's that loud and that close. But anyhow, I did find down here that we do have one tree. And this one was not down before. You can see right down in there. There's where it broke off. Now this is already a rotted dead tree. And it's lying down in there, and it extends up. So that'll be something for me to clear, because this whole area here, I'm actually planning on putting in a deck out across this space right here, right off the trail. And that deck area will be a great little place for people to sit out and enjoy nature. It's in this nice little open area where the sun's always shining through. Now, interesting, because you can see how the grapevine got pulled down by that tree. Look how far up this grapevine goes. It is climbing up this towering pine, up, up, up. Look at that grapevine. It's crazy. I mean, that's at least 40, 50 feet up there. That's a lot of grapevine. More mushrooms. They're actually everywhere you look when you start looking. Now here is something that I'm excited to have surrounding the fern house building site, and that is spicebush, or some people call it wild allspice. I didn't really notice that it was here when I started working. I was pretty focused on the site itself, but as I started trimming some branches back, I quickly noticed the aroma and realized what I was working with. I was recently reading that during the Civil War, this was actually commonly used as a tea, as sometimes supplies were difficult to get, and the tea and coffee that people like to enjoy wasn't as readily available to them. It smells so good. It smells like Christmas. That is awesome. I wish you could smell what I'm smelling right now. Now in the springtime, a spicebush is easy to identify because it has like a fuzzy little yellow flower all down along the stems. And of course, if you rub the stem, you'll get the amazing allspice kind of scent from it. But those flowers turn into these berries, and later in the year, these berries will get to be red, and they can be dried and ground and used just as allspice, or they can be steeped into tea. But in this green state, only the green part is flavored like allspice, and that little white part is actually very peppery. Oh my gosh. It's like citrusy and spicy. That is amazing. I don't know if anybody eats it, but it smells delicious, and I can see why it may be tempting. When I read up on it, I learned that you actually can dry out that white center part and grind it down and use it just like pepper. So, yep, you can eat it. This is such a great little spot down here. Just looking to see if there's anything of interest. I think one of the things that people miss out on. Oh, look. I found a puffball here. See inside of there? How cool was that? Remember that puffball I was poking at earlier? This is just a already used, dried out fungus puffball that has already served its purpose. It has already spread its spores in the forest, and now it's just laying around, deteriorating and adding to the soil in the forest. Kind of cool to find. One of the reasons why I think people miss the beauty of what it means to spend time in nature is they don't really look closely. Maybe they go out and go for a walk, but their focus becomes getting the walk in, or getting the number of steps in, or getting their cardio happening, getting their heart rate up. But they really just overlook looking at the details. And when you start looking at the details, that's when you start finding the lessons that nature has to offer. You start finding the things that just make you feel connected to things that are bigger than yourself. Oh, wow. So look at this tree. Look at this scarring on the bark. What a unique pattern. I'm not sure what made it. I don't know if it's a woodpecker or insects. If it was a woodpecker, it would be likely because of insects. Really cool. This is the kind of stuff that inspires artwork. You know, even if I'm not painting a tree, I'm thinking about that pattern. When I saw that puffball, I thought of stained glass. Nature absolutely inspires creativity. I look overhead and I'm seeing a lot more dots. This time it's grapes. So it might be a good year for grapes. Not every year is. Check it out. And if you didn't look close, you'd never even seen that katydid sitting there watching us walk by. Some people call them a brush cricket. They're an important pollinator though. These trails are quite overgrown. It's not the way I plan to present them to guests, so I'll have a little bit of work here to this upper portion, but it won't take long to clean up. Now this sumac came down during the storms this past week, twisted off from the top, but it brought down with it all the grapevine. So now instead of trying to peer way up into the treetops to see what the grapevines are doing, I've got them right here in front of me. I can touch them. And man, it looks like an awesome year for grapes. They're very plentiful. I have used wild grapes already in my kitchen. We've harvested them in the past and I've made grape juice out of them. They can be quite tart. Some people call them fox grapes. But some years they're large, some years they're pretty small. But any year, nature always just knows when they're ready, and it seems like the animals scarf them up instantaneously, even if you've been keeping a really close eye on how ripe they are. Now this right here is one of the really important reasons that I plan on clearing the top of that trail so guests can hike up to this. It doesn't look too special right now. It's much more spectacular during the spring months, but it's a vernal pool that we have on our property, and it's a really, really important part of the ecosystem here. Amphibians rely on vernal pools as their breeding grounds, and it is just such a classroom. It is so awesome to have this at our fingertips. This spring we got to see the wood frogs come out. They're really unique. They actually sound like a duck and they lay their eggs here. And then we got to come down and actually handle the eggs and check them out and watch them and see them hatch out, and then see the varieties of different salamanders as they laid their eggs. And their egg sacs were very different, of course, than the frog eggs. We watched them, and there's just always something down here to check out and see. Right next to the vernal pool, there is an entire patch of wild mint that's in bloom right now. This is a great edible. It's actually very pretty too. Smells amazing. It is an edible. And that is not the only variety of mint species that we have here on our property. This is hoary mint. Both of these are native to our area. The hoary mint is a bit stronger, I think. That is amazing. And it's super strong. If you come to the fern house and forget to pack your toothbrush, no worries, just come get some of this. I think you'll be okay. Right now, this hoary mint is lining the whole way up our lane and further up onto the trails on our property. And actually, if you keep an eye out for it, you'll see it along a lot of roadsides right now. A really distinct quality that it has is kind of like the powdery white tips of its leaves towards the top of the plant, and then it blooms with a whitish flower with like little purple dots to it, and usually the bees are pretty attracted to it, so there's almost always something buzzing around it. So I've made my loop down to see the bittersweet. Now I'm almost back up to the house, but one last stop before I get there, and that is to pick some of these wild red raspberries that have been growing. Now, earlier I showed you the blackberries on my way down. The difference between a blackberry and a raspberry is that the little part that holds them onto the plant there, right there, that part stays with a blackberry. So if you recall, the blackberry had a little filled center. With a raspberry, that part does not stay with the fruit. It stays attached to the plant. So when the berry is removed, it leaves a hollow inside. And that is the difference between a raspberry and a blackberry. Super sweet. That should be juice or wine. I'm going to take the time to pick a handful of these before I get back to the house. This isn't the kind of thing I typically buy routinely at the store. I kind of enjoy letting it be a treat that I get to harvest wild on our property once or twice a year. Now, we have had years when the berry harvest has been so plentiful, just picking what is growing wild, that we've been able to make jams and jellies and freeze berries for use later in the year. So for sure, we may have not cultivated these crops, but they can really be plentiful. But we don't do that every year. Most years, they are probably mostly just enjoyed by other creatures out there living off the land, and occasionally me or my kids. So now it's just a matter of figuring out how I'm going to enjoy these berries. I've already eaten a couple handfuls directly off the bushes along the way, so that's definitely one way to enjoy them. But I think I'm going to go ahead today and mix them up with some frozen blueberries and let this be a nice way to wrap up my little hike this morning. I learned this from a friend. You take some frozen berries and sprinkle them with powdered sugar and drizzle them with milk. The milk and the sugar actually crystallizes around the frozen berries, and it makes a really great frozen treat. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a substitute for vanilla ice cream, but in a pinch, it is absolutely delicious, and it is the perfect thing to cool down with after my long walk. There it is. Now, mine wasn't completely frozen because I did use fresh berries with it, but it is still delicious and very cold. Well, thank you for watching. Thanks for hiking with me today as I took some time to explore around our property a little bit. I hope that you will like, subscribe, and leave any comments you have below.